All right, let's get started. What one man can do himself directly is but little. If, however, he can stir up 10 others to take up the task, he has accomplished much. The Wright brothers. Here's the battle plan. We're going to start off with emergency procedures. We're going to use the pilot operating handbook to address those. Then I'm going to cover some of the questions that I've been receiving throughout the week. By the way, I'm really happy you guys are sticking with the program. Really happy to see the progress you guys are making. Stick with it. And don't feel weird about asking me questions. I love this stuff. You can't bore me. You can't annoy me with aviation questions. So keep them coming. We'll get into the Airman Certification Standards. We're going to do 2 short lessons that cover those standards, and then we'll get into a flight planning lesson that you guys are going to follow along with. And of course, anytime you have questions, shout them out. But then we'll also do a Q&A at the end just to make sure everybody's questions are answered. Ready? Let's hit it. Okay. Let's talk about our instruments. There are 3 main categories we're going to talk about today. We're going to have the left side over here plus the tachometer. This is your engine health. The 6-pack here kind of gives you a 3-dimensional picture of what your aircraft is doing in space. And by that, I mean 3-dimensional space, not space. We're not there yet, soon. And then over here, we've got our navigational instruments, which are really cool. We're going to cover those later on. So today, we're going to focus on these 2 sections. On the left, we have our fuel gauge. Of course, just like the fuel gauge in our car, this tells us about our fuel state. Can't really 100% rely on these. I would be very cautious about trusting your fuel gauge. It's better to do your own calculations and know for a fact how much fuel you're burning and how much you've got left. Next to the fuel gauge, we've got our exhaust gas temperature gauge. This tells us about the temperature of the gases coming out of our engine. This is our fuel flow. We can actually adjust how much fuel we're putting into the engine for the given amount of air. And so we can adjust our fuel flow and see how much fuel we're actually burning per hour. So that's fuel flow. Next, we've got oil. We've got a temperature gauge, tells us the temperature of the oil in the engine, and an oil pressure gauge, which tells us about the oil pressure. If either of these go in the red, that's cause for concern. We should discontinue the flight. Next, we have our vacuum gauge and our ammeter. So our vacuum gauge, let me back up. There are a couple of instruments that are gyroscopically driven, and they need a vacuum pressure to operate. This tells us about the health of our vacuum system. If it's in the green, that means that we can trust our vacuum-driven, gyroscopically operated instruments. Next, here we've got the ammeter, which tells us about the electrical system. We want it to be 0, essentially. It tells us whether or not the battery is receiving a charge or if it's discharging. So to recap, fuel gauge, fuel flow, exhaust gas temperature, oil pressure, oil temperature, vacuum gauge, and ammeter, or electrical systems. So that's that. And then, of course, our tachometer tells us our RPM for our engine. Now, so that's engine stuff. Here in the center, these are our 6-pack. We call this the 6-pack, which tells us a lot about our aircraft. So this is our airspeed indicator, which takes ram air from the pitot tube and compares it to the static air and gives us an indication of how fast we're moving through the air. So this guy here and the altimeter and the vertical speed indicator all operate on pressure. So they take static pressure and they give us information about our airspeed, our altitude, and our climb rate, or our vertical speed. So it's actually really cool. The altimeter, we set the sea level pressure in our altimeter, and then it compares that with the air pressure outside of the aircraft and gives us an indication of our altitude. Similarly, the vertical speed indicator compares our rate of change of air pressure and gives us an indication of how fast we are climbing or descending. So to recap, airspeed indicator, altimeter, and vertical speed indicator all use pressure or air pressure. They are the pitot-static instruments. Next, we have our 3 gyroscopically driven instruments. Our attitude indicator and our heading indicator are typically vacuum driven. So they take, the engine drives a vacuum and it spins these gyros really, really fast. And then they use gyroscopic principles to operate. So this one gives us information about our pitch and our roll. And this one gives us an indication of our heading. Now be careful. This is not a compass. This is a gyro. Our compass is up here, which is not in the picture. So these are both vacuum-driven gyroscopic instruments. Finally, we have our electrically driven gyroscope, our turn coordinator. This guy tells us information about the quality of our turn. So if we roll to a standard rate turn, that's like this guy right here, that would tell us that if we were to turn for 2 minutes at that rate of a turn, we would make a full 360-degree turn, or a standard rate turn. And with that information, we can actually time our turns very precisely. So if we know that one full circle takes 2 minutes, a half circle takes 1 minute, a quarter circle takes 30 seconds. This 45-degree mark will take 15 seconds. So you can see 15, 30, 45, 1 minute, 1 minute 15, 1 minute 30, 1 minute 45, and then 2 minutes. So we can actually time our turns if other instruments fail. So that's kind of cool, right? So why do we care? Because we need these instruments to operate safely. So today, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I want you to think through what might be happening, right? If we have, by the way, any questions before we move on?
What is the difference between the heading and the compass?
Sweet. Yeah, great question. So the compass is a magnet, right? If we look at our planet Earth, short version, it's a compass. The compass is a magnet. The gyroscope here, or the heading indicator, is a gyroscope. That's the basic difference. Does that cover your question, or do you want me to go in deeper? Because I can go nuts.
I was just wondering, like, what functionally, because don't they point like your direction in relation to where you are?
They do. They both do the same thing, but they do it in different ways. And man, I love physics. So let's take a look at our planet. Let's pretend this circle over here is our planet, right? And we've got the North Pole that we've decided is the North Pole, right? Now, the true north is not co-located with our magnetic north. The magnetic north is somewhere over here, and we've got these lines of magnetic flux, right? And our magnetic compass lines up with these lines of magnetic flux to give us an indication of our heading, right? It's all about magnets. Our gyroscopically driven heading indicator here uses a spinning gyro, and the two principles of a gyroscope are rigidity in space and precession. So the gyroscope wants to stay in place. And so when we rotate about it, it'll give us an indication of where we are in relation to where we set it, essentially. So gyroscopes operate on the principles of rigidity in space and precession, and compasses operate on the principle of magnetism or electromagnetism. Two separate systems that will give you an indication of heading. Super cool, right? All right, maybe it's just me. I'm a giant nerd. So there's that. Does that answer your question, though?
Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks for asking. Okay, so let's say we're flying along, right? And for whatever reason, we see that we make a turn, and this is telling us that we're in a turn. And this tells us our airspeed's good, our altimeter is staying here, and our vertical speed indicator is 0. But then these guys both look out of whack. And this over here tells us this little needle is down here. What system do you think has failed?
The vacuum system?
That's right, the vacuum system. Of course, the vacuum gauge tells us the health of our vacuum system. If it is not in the green, then our vacuum system has likely failed. All right, let's say we lose power to our panel. We see our GPS go out, our transponder's out, and our ammeter is out. What instrument are we likely to lose?
Would it be the turn indicator?
That's right, the turn coordinator. This guy. This one's electrically driven. All right, excellent. Let's erase all this. All right, do you guys have your pilot operating handbooks that I gave you? I'm going to assume yes, because I gave it to you guys. Let's pull up the emergency procedures. I think that's, what chapter is that? Chapter 3, and just talk about one quick emergency procedure, then we'll move on. I have a tendency to ramble when I talk about airplanes, so if you guys notice me rambling, just reel me in. Who wants to take the question? I'm going to put you on the spot.
I'll take the question.
Sweet, sounds good. Let me pull up the procedure, make sure that I'm following along here. All right. Go to page 3-3 for engine failures, right? So let's say we're flying along, right? And we're tracking airspeed's good, attitude indicators, everything's operating fine. And all of a sudden, our tachometer just goes to 0. We lose our tachometer, our propeller stops spinning, and the engine noise dies. I kind of give it away, but what do you think has happened?
The tachometer going to 0 means that your engine's failed or turned off, or anything in between that. And since your propeller is also an indicator, means your tachometer is reading true. So you would follow the engine failure during flight. So you would take your airspeed to 65, your carburetor heat on, and then you would try to restart. You're putting your fuel selector back to both, your rich mixture, and then you would try to start it with start, and then your primer in and locked.
Yeah, excellent. So, he followed along basically with the checklist, which is exactly what you should do. There are 3 things that we can have memorized for an engine failure, which is A, B, C, airspeed, 65. That's our best glide speed. B, best place to land. Look around and see where you're going to land, assuming you can't get the engine back online. And then C, consult your checklist. And the checklist, like you said, engine failure during flight, airspeed 65, check. We're going to use our pitch and our trim to get this needle to stay right there. And remember the trim tab, I think you guys have seen the first module. You basically trim it off so you can take your hands off the yoke and the airplane will fly itself at 65 knots. That's going to give us the farthest glide distance as we try to troubleshoot the problem. Look around, find a place to land, and then C checklist, 65 knots, carb heat on. This particular aircraft doesn't have carb heat. The simulator here doesn't have carb heat. Fuel selector valve to both. That's this guy. This tells the aircraft what tank to take fuel from, and we want it on both. So both wings, and then primer in and lock. So basically, we're making sure that again, this is not a carbureted engine. That the primer is in, and then we try to restart the aircraft. Yeah, solid. Any questions? That's pretty much how it's going to be. I'm just going to ask you a quick question. You're just going to look at the checklist, run through it, and kind of identify where your flow is going to be on this aircraft. Cool.
Even though, like, if you have an engine failure during flight, should you always try and like restart your engine? Because if it like seizes in a manner that like you think the engine's like seized or something like that, couldn't it create further problems?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If that is the case, then yeah, just basically glide it in. You guys familiar with Mitch Hedberg? Love his joke. When an airplane loses an engine, it turns into a glider. Sorry for the convenience. It's a lot of people get scared about having an engine failure, but it's actually pretty benign because the aircraft will glide on its own as long as you have it trimmed correctly. And then it's all about finding a good place to land and just putting it down safely. But yeah, good question. Sometimes you shouldn't restart the engine. Let's see. Questions about emergency procedures? Anything else before we move on? Cool. By the way, do you guys like having my goofy face here? Is this better than last time when you couldn't see me? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I'll assume you guys like it. Sweet. Thank you. Okay, so let's cover some questions from this week. Let me just reiterate how awesome it is that you guys are sticking with the online course. I really appreciate it. It's incredible. So thank you for that. Your questions. So one of the questions I heard was how you sign up for the exam. So first of all, you have to sign up through IACRA, which is the FAA's tracking program or tracking system. You'll sign in through IACRA. We can do a whole discussion about that later on down the road when we get closer to the exam. You sign up through IACRA, apply for a student pilot certificate, and then your flight instructor will go in and approve it or recommend that you should get your student pilot certificate. And then you'll go through their testing system, I think it's PSI, and sign up for a test in your area. And you just pick whatever day you want, whatever time, and then when you have successfully completed the course and I'm happy with your progress, then I'll give you an endorsement. You show up to the day of the test with that endorsement and your ID, and then you can go take the exam. We'll talk about how the exam works, like the ins and out, as we get closer. But that in general is how it's going to go. First, IACRA, then sign up for the knowledge exam, and then you go and take it. Does that answer your question enough? Anybody want any more details on how to go take the exam? And remember, we will cover this more in depth later. No? Okay, cool. Second, just before we started here, somebody asked about where we can find specific topics that we don't get on the quizzes. If you go to the FAA website, faa.gov, and go to the handbooks page, I'm going to close out of this, discard that, and that's going to go to 0, and I'm re-recording. Good. Okay. If you go to faa.gov, and let's say you missed a question on weather, you can go to faa.gov regulations, handbooks and manuals, come over here, and then either look at aircraft or aviation handbooks and manuals or advisory circulars. If it's weather, I think the ACS, the ACs are where you want to go. Let's see. Yeah, aviation weather AFS 400 or 006 Bravo. Click on this, and I think it's going to open a new window. Yes. No. Where'd it go? Oh, it's right here. Yeah, downloading it. And then I'm going to switch over here to this page just so everybody who isn't here can also watch it. Right? I hope that's recording. Okay, so this is the advisory circular for weather. Basically, you go through like, all right, I missed a question on, I don't know. Let's see what we got. I missed a question on precipitation. It's right here, precipitation. And it'll give you information about precipitation. If you missed a weather question, this is, for the most part, where you're going to look. If it's general aviation stuff, check the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge or the Airplane Flying Handbook. So there's that. Let me go back over here and show you what that looks like. If you go back to aviation handbooks and manuals, then here it is, Airplane Flying Handbook or the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Those are typically a good place to start. If you can't find it after looking through here, then just send me a message and I'll help you track it down. But for the most part, that's where it's going to be, either there or the Federal Aviation Regulations Aeronautical Information Manual, the FAR-AIM, which again is on the website here. Make sense? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know, and we'll come back to this. So there's that. And then the other big question that I had is people asking me when we're going to start flight training. So I'm in the process of developing what is going to be our flight training program. I'm imagining it's probably going to be about 5 slots, probably the top performers through the course. I'm going to try to give them priority. I'd like to get everybody in, but just with the limited amount of time we've got, looking to start around January 15th. It's going to be fast paced. I would like to fly frequently, and I'm planning on putting you to work. It's going to be tough, but if you come work with me, then you're going to earn your wings faster, and you'll be ready to take the check ride earlier. Flight training typically costs $10,000 to $12,000. So I know some schools allow you to pay that off as you go. So we'll work, if you're serious about, pursuing your flight training, we can find a way to work, to make it work out. But that kind of, I hope that answers the question. Looking to start serious flight training sometime early next year. And if you really want to get your wings, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it happens. So any other questions before we move on? Sweet. Okay, so today we're going to cover 2 ACS topics. There's physiological or aeromedical factors, and then the second one is getting into flight planning. So we're going to cover a number of health and physiological factors that can influence a pilot's ability to fly, specifically these guys here: your medical certificate, hypoxia, hyperventilation, your middle ear and sinus problems, spatial D, motion sickness, carbon monoxide, fatigue and stress, dehydration, alcohol and drugs, nitrogen and scuba diving, and the I'm Safe checklist. Why? Because many of these factors not only affect the health and well-being of the pilot, but can quickly lead to in-flight emergencies. So when I got my medical certificate, I had just gotten out of the Army and I was broken, for lack of a better word. So I went to a doctor and he was like, fill out this checklist or fill out this questionnaire. I filled it out. He said, great, thank you, have a nice day. Fail or denied. Have a nice day, be gone. And he didn't really talk to me. He didn't help me out with it. It was really frustrating. I had no idea why. And so with my flight instructor, I found another doctor who actually explained to me the whole process, and especially why I got my medical denied initially. And then he helped me find ways to prove to the FAA that I was medically healthy enough to fly. It took me 3 years to earn my medical certificate. I think it was like 3 years and $3,000. It sucked. But now I've got a first class medical. And so I'm really happy. I don't want you to go through that same process, right? So your medical certificate is supposed to be a routine medical exam from a doctor. And there are 3 classes. There's first, second, and third. For a private pilot, you need a third class. For a flight instructor, you need third class. Commercial, second. And then if you want to fly ATP or like commercial aircraft, like airliners, you're going to need a first class medical. Basically, they just tell you how healthy, I guess, you are. Yeah. Anyways, when you go with a flight instructor, make sure they recommend a good doctor. Figure out who they go with and whether or not they recommend them, so that you don't have any problems. Yeah, this is a bummer. Once you get your medical certificate, it's good for essentially 5 years if you are under the age of 40. And then it's up to you to make sure that you are healthy to fly. Every time you go up, you should ask yourself, could I pass a medical exam today? And if you couldn't, it is your responsibility to pause and not go flying that day. There is also basic med. This allows you to fly without a medical certificate if you meet certain requirements. And then there's the driver's license, which can be used in place of medical in certain situations. If you can swing it and get a medical, do that. That's the best. If you don't have any medical issues, then this is the best way to go. If you do have medical issues that you're concerned might make it difficult to get a medical, talk to me offline, talk to a flight instructor, we'll make sure you get squared away. Okay, let's get into hypoxia. Hypoxia in plain English is a lack of oxygen, specifically a lack of oxygen to your brain. There are 4 types. There's hypoxic, hypemic, stagnant, and histotoxic hypoxia. Hypoxic hypoxia this is when there's not enough oxygen getting into your lungs, and can happen specifically for us at high altitudes. If we are cruising at 20,000 feet, there's just not enough oxygen for us to absorb. Hypemic hypoxia can be a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. That's when there's not enough oxygen to the cells of the body. Stagnant hypoxia, my favorite, is the one where basically the blood is pooling in your legs and is not getting up to your brain. And this can be caused by pulling excessive G. So if you're in like an F-18 and pulling like a 9G turn, all that blood is going from your brain down into your legs, and it's not getting enough oxygen in your brain. And you can pass out. That's called G-LOC, or G-induced loss of consciousness, and it's all hypoxia. Then there's histotoxic hypoxia. This is when your cells can't use the oxygen, specifically because alcohol and drugs have taken the place of the oxygen in your blood. So the 4 are hypoxic, hypemic, stagnant, and histotoxic hypoxia. And hypoxia, again in plain English, is a lack of oxygen to the brain. Look at my brain. It's pretty. The symptoms of hypoxia include cyanosis. This is the bluing of the lips and the fingertips, headache, decrease in reaction time. You start acting goofy, impaired judgment, euphoria, visual impairment, drowsiness, lightheadedness, tingling fingers, toes, and numbness. If you experience one or more of these, it's possible that you are becoming hypoxic. What should you do? You should either get supplemental oxygen immediately or descend to a lower altitude. The time of useful consciousness. This is kind of cool. At 40,000 feet, if you're breathing just regular 40,000 feet altitude air, you have about 15 to 20 seconds of useful consciousness. That's 20 seconds where you're like, all right, I'm in, and then you're done. You're passed out. At 30,000 feet, you got 1 to 2 minutes of oxygen, and then at 22,000 feet, you've got 5 to 10 minutes. So when you're in an airliner and the flight attendants are like, make sure you get your oxygen mask on before you get your kids, that's because you've only got about 20 seconds to get it on before you pass out. So you will be useless if you get your kids on first. If you can get yours on first, then you've got more time to get your kids. Right? And again, to reiterate, oxygen, altitude to correct for hypoxia. Then there's hyperventilation. This is when you're really stressed out or anxious, scared in the aircraft, and you start over breathing, right? And this can lead to an excessive loss of carbon dioxide from your blood. It's very similar in symptoms to hypoxia. You'll have like visual impairment, lightheadedness, tingling, and hot and cold sensations, also spasms and unconsciousness. The treatment for this is to try to breathe normally, either talk out loud or breathe into a paper bag. And if you are unsure if you are dealing with hypoxia or hyperventilation with one of your passengers, then treat for hypoxia because this is the more dangerous condition. Now let's talk about middle ear and sinus problems. I don't know if you guys have done a lot of flying, but if you've ever gone up when you're not feeling 100%, it can make things worse. So let's talk about the middle ear first. There's a difference in air pressure in the middle ear and the outside of the ear. And that can cause a lot of pain, reduced hearing, and sensitivity. It's really uncomfortable, right? If you're in a climb, your eardrum might bulge outward. And if you're in descent, your eardrum will bulge inward. That's because of the change in pressure in the air around you. What you can do is chew gum, stretch your jaw, do the Valsalva maneuver, the thing where you blow while you're pressing against your nose. Or you can, take specific medicine for the situation. Then there's sinus problems. If you're feeling ill, and you've got like a lot of congestion, the change in pressure as you climb or descend can cause a lot of pressure in your face and in your nose, and it can be really, really painful. It's not fun. Typically, we don't like to take passengers up when they're sick because it is very uncomfortable. And you as a pilot, of course, shouldn't be flying when you're sick anyways. So some symptoms might include sinus or upper tooth pain, bloody mucus. And the best thing to do is just not fly when you're feeling sick. But if you happen to go up and you've got sinus problems, basically slow descent. Try not to change the altitude fast because that's changing the air pressure. And it can be really, really uncomfortable for your passengers or for you. Let's talk about spatial disorientation. This is when you have a lack of orientation of the position, altitude, attitude, or movement of the plane in space. In plain English, you think you're doing something when the plane is doing something else, right? We have a couple of different systems for orienting ourselves in space. We've got our visual system, which is our eyes, which is the largest source of information. And these pretty much go away when we fly into a cloud. We lose all visual references out when we're inside of a cloud. We have the somatosensory system. These are nerves that sense position based on gravity and feeling. And we have the vestibular system. These are motion sensing systems in the inner ear. And they are semicircular canals that detect angular acceleration and otolith organs that detect linear acceleration, right? So if you are not turning, you're flying straight and level, you're basically going to feel like this. You're going to feel like you're straight and level. When you start a turn, the fluid in your ear is going to move and the little hairs inside your ear are going to detect that. And it's going to feel like you're turning. If you are in a constant rate turn and you're doing everything correctly as a pilot, eventually it's going to feel like you're straight and level. It's going to, the fluid in your ears is basically going to level out and it's going to think, all right, cool, now we're straight and level. Well, if we are actually in a turn and the fluid has stabilized, when we go back to straight and level, it's going to think your brain, the fluid in your inner ear is going to feel like we're in a right bank. And so it's very easy to think, all right, I'm straight and level. Now I'm feeling like I'm in a turn. Okay, everything is equalized now. I feel like I'm straight and level. Oh, shoot, I'm in a turn, right? And if you can't overcome that sensation, it's very easy to try to put yourself back to where you think is straight and level and eventually graveyard spiral down to the ground and crash. So be careful. That's why we start in visual reference or visual flight rules and then introduce instrument flying later on. And then you gotta ignore what your body's telling you when you're in IMC, in instrument meteorological conditions. Ignore what your body's telling you. Trust your instruments, right? So that's spatial D. Let's talk about motion sickness. Oh, this one's embarrassing. This can be caused when your brain is receiving conflicting messages about what your body is doing. It can also be caused by anxiety and stress. So if you are in a high-speed aircraft and you're not in control of the aircraft and somebody else is yanking and banking, it can basically jostle. It can completely uncage your gyro, and you get nauseous. You'll experience discomfort, nausea, dizziness, paleness, sweating, and vomiting. And it can happen typically in the initial flights, but if you're the person flying, it typically goes away after the first few lessons. Yeah, it's not fun. My favorite flight was flying an AT-6 Texan, which is an old warbird. It's a training aircraft. And towards the end of the flight, after we did all the cool maneuvering around, like I was fine for all that. And then finally towards the end, we're coming into land. And then I actually gave up controls at that point. Like, so when I was flying it around doing the maneuvers and everything, I was happy as a clam. And then when I handed the controls back to the instructor pilot for him to land the plane, that's when I got nauseous. It was so weird. I was like totally comfortable with the cool maneuvers, but the moment I let go of control of the aircraft and the instructor was flying it, like I was like, oh shoot. And I got all nauseous and felt really gross. It's kind of interesting. Even me as a pilot with 100 plus hours at a time. So don't be ashamed if you get motion sick or if you develop motion sickness. Just let your instructor or let your co-pilot, whoever, know like, hey, I'm not feeling great. Let's fly straight and level, open up the air vents, and then just look out to the horizon and make sure you take control of the aircraft so you have control of what's going on, and it's easier to deal with. Right? To recap, open the fresh air vents, focus on objects outside the airplane, and avoid unnecessary head movement, and take control of the airplane and fly smoothly. So that's what you do for motion sickness. Groovy? Oh man, my face is red. You guys are making me nervous. All right, let's move on to carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas that is produced by the engine. And if the gas finds its way into the cabin through the defrost vents, it can poison you. You can literally get, carbon monoxide poisoning. It attaches to the hemoglobin in the blood 200 times more easily than oxygen. And this prevents the hemoglobin from carrying oxygen to the cells, resulting in hypemic hypoxia. So also smoking is bad. Don't smoke. Smoking also causes carbon monoxide poisoning. So don't smoke. Some of the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning are headache, blurred vision, dizziness, drowsiness, loss of muscle power. There are some CO detectors. I've seen some guys flying around with these guys in their airplane. They basically help you detect whether or not carbon monoxide is in the cabin. You can assume that carbon monoxide is in the cabin if you smell a strong odor of exhaust, by the way. So if you smell exhaust from your engine, there's a good chance there's carbon monoxide in your cabin. And you should open up your windows and get some fresh air in there. If you think there's carbon monoxide in the cabin, turn off your heater, open your fresh air vents, and use supplemental oxygen to overcome it. And of course, land. You don't want to be flying around with carbon monoxide in the cockpit. Okay, let's talk about fatigue and stress. So when I was in Ranger Regiment, we did a land nav course. Love land nav. Actually, I'm teaching my son how to do land navigation now. How are we looking at time? We're good. Okay. So we would do land nav, right? You get a piece of paper, a map with your points, and then your compass, and you have to go figure out where you are and go find points, right? Pretty straightforward. Well, we would do these at night after a long day, after several days of not getting any sleep. And so I was out doing a night land nav course at Fort Benning, Georgia. And halfway through the course, I could have sworn there was an evil turtle following me around. I was freaking out. I'm telling you, I really thought there was an evil turtle stalking me through this land nav course. And it's all because I was just super tired. So acute fatigue, this is short. Sorry, go ahead. Did you have a question? Nope. Okay, cool. Acute fatigue is short-term, normal occurrence in everyday life. This is like if you're just super tired after a couple of days of not getting any sleep. That's acute fatigue, right? And then there's skill fatigue. This is a type of acute fatigue affecting pilots. Effects include timing disruption and perceptual field disruption. If you get so tired that you start hallucinating, that's probably not a good time to go fly. Of course, my situation is a bit extreme. I wasn't planning on flying an aircraft through the land nav course. But it's just the point is to tell you, like, you should get some sleep. Sleep is a very important thing. And if you don't get enough sleep, it can cause some serious problems, to include hallucinations. So the prevention of acute fatigue is proper diet, adequate rest, and sleep. So get a good night's sleep before you go fly. It's always a good idea, especially for the check ride. So that's acute fatigue. Then there's chronic fatigue. This is long-term fatigue, usually with psychological roots or an underlying disease. So this is like if you like for months at a time can't get a good night's sleep. Some of the symptoms include weakness, tiredness, heart palpitations, headaches, irritability, aches, and pains. And the prevention, go talk to your doctor and see if you can figure out why you can't get a good night's sleep. And in either case, if you have acute or chronic fatigue, if you're seeing evil turtles stalking you on the out in the land nav course, then you should stay on the ground and not fly. What's up, short man?
Are you recording?
I am. I'm actually talking to a whole crew here. All right, let's talk about stress now. This is the body's response to physical and psychological demands placed upon it. There, again, is acute and chronic stress. Acute is short-term. This triggers the fight or flight response. And healthy individuals can usually cope with acute stress. Then there's chronic stress. PTSD, I think, is characterized as chronic stress. If you are exposed to a lot of stress for a long period of time, it can cause psychological problems, loneliness, financial worries, relationship or work problems. Intolerable burden exceeding one's ability to cope and cause performance to fall sharply. So if you have, again, either of these, a high amount of stress, either acute or chronic, don't fly. You don't need to add on to the current stress level by putting yourself up at altitude and dealing with ATC and angry passengers. So let's talk about dehydration. This is a critical loss of water from the body, and it can be caused by a couple things: high temperatures, wind, humidity, diuretic drinks like coffee, tea, or alcohol. Don't drink alcohol and fly, guys. The effects of dehydration can include fatigue, headaches, cramps, tingling, sleepiness, dizziness, and the physical and mental performance is degraded. So if you are dehydrated, like being stressed out or like being extremely tired, it can really degrade your performance and make you an unsafe pilot. So if you are not getting enough water, don't fly. The prevention, stay hydrated. Don't wait until you're thirsty. Like I tell Punchy over here, drink water, right?
Hydrated.
That's right, hydrated eye. Wear light, porous clothing and a hat, and keep the cockpit ventilated. Yeah, we do get a lot of sunlight. We do get a lot of sunlight in the cockpit, especially if we're staring at the sun, especially in the summer during hot days. So drink water and avoid things like coffee and soda, caffeine. Okay, let's talk about alcohol and drugs. Alcohol. Just don't fly when you're drinking. I feel like that's pretty obvious. Remember that even a small amount can impair judgment and decrease your performance. I mean, just a single drink can make it, completely unsafe. The general rule of thumb is 8 hours bottle to throttle. So I guess if you're drinking, keep it to a minimum and then 8 hours bottle to throttle. Remember that altitude multiplies the effect of alcohol on the brain. This is a form of histotoxic hypoxia. So if you go fly while you're drunk, it's going to be you're going to have a bad day, right? I feel like that goes without saying. Just don't drink and fly, guys. Then there's drugs, and not just like illegal, illicit drugs. A lot of medication that we take can actually adversely affect our ability to fly, especially up at higher altitudes. So the best thing to do is go check the FAA's website and make sure that whatever medication you're on is safe to fly with. Typically, if it says "do not operate machinery," don't operate an aircraft with that medicine, right? Yeah. Questions? Sweet. Let's talk about nitrogen and scuba diving. Let's zoom out a little bit. You guys ever go to the pool and go down to like the 10-foot, like the deep end, and you like feel the weight of all the water crushing you down? Well, actually, that happens a lot in aviation as well. If you imagine the atmosphere is a giant air ocean, we are at the bottom of that air ocean, and as you go up in altitude, the pressure actually decreases because of there's less air pushing down on you. It's kind of neat. So in scuba diving subjects the body to increased pressure, which allows more nitrogen to dissolve in the body. Reduced pressures associated with flying can release the excess nitrogen. So we want to be really careful about taking people who go scuba diving up flying with us. In general, we want to wait at least 12 hours before we go up. 24 hours if they did a controlled ascent. So just be careful. 12 hours if you didn't do a controlled ascent, and then 24 hours if you did a controlled ascent. All right, and then there's the I'm safe checklist. This is illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and eating. Just like we do a checklist when we go pre-flight the aircraft or when we do emergency procedures, we have a checklist for us, the pilot, to make sure that we are fit to fly. So let's run through it. Illness. Am I feeling sick today? If I am sick, I'm not going to go fly. Medication. Am I taking any medications that might affect my judgment or cause drowsiness? If that is the case, then I'm not going to fly. Am I stressed out? Do I need to, go take a chill pill and relax for the day? Alcohol? No. Fatigue. Am I tired? Adequately rested? Remember that fatigue is one of the most insidious hazards to flying. And then there's emotion. Am I emotionally upset? So if any of these are negative, or if any of these are a big red flag, then don't go flying. Questions. So that's the first half of our ACS discussion. We'll get into navigation here in a bit. Any questions? Sweet. All right, so part 2 of our ACS discussion. We're going to be talking about flight planning, and this is going to lead into a flight plan that we work on together, and I'd like you guys to follow along afterwards. So what is it? It's the process of planning and executing cross-country flights that is in excess of 50 nautical miles, and procedures for different situations that may arise during flight. So we're going to talk about some terms about flight planning, charts, navigation, pre-flight weather, planning a flight, diverting, and loss procedures. Why do we care? Because it's integral to safely flying from point to point. We're going to talk about time, fuel requirements, prevention of getting lost, and making flight planning easier and more organized. Now, I know we are in the 21st century. Most people don't operate with paper maps anymore, but aeronautical charts are our road maps, right? There are a couple different flavors of aeronautical charts that you might see. There's the sectional chart. These are the most common ones. They are the 1 to 500,000 scale. They are revised semi-annually, so make sure that you have an up-to-date chart. They give you information about airport data, nav aids, airspace, and topography. Then there's the terminal chart. These are helpful in or near Class Bravo airspace. It's a more detailed, like a zoomed-in version of the sectional, right? And it's 1 to 250,000 scale. Again, check them to make sure that they are up to date. Then there's the World Aeronautical Chart. I'll be honest, I haven't actually used one of these before because they're like way zoomed out. It's like 1 to 1,000,000 scale. It's rarely used in general aviation, mostly for moderate speed aircraft. Current charts. Remember that information changes rapidly, so you want to verify that you've got an up-to-date chart. Also, check for NOTAMs to make sure that even if you've got an up-to-date chart, something else might have popped up in the last week or so that might have changed something in the chart. So check your NOTAMs. Now, there are a couple different types of navigation that we use in aviation. They are pilotage, dead reckoning, radio navigation, and a combination of these, right? So pilotage, this is navigating in reference to landmarks. So we basically look at our chart, our map, and we look outside and use our old Mark I eyeballs and verify that we are where we think we are. We use lakes, rivers, mountains, roads, cities, airports, basically anything we can see on the map and outside to verify our position. Dead reckoning. This is actually really cool. This is navigation using math, or navigation by math. We navigate based on time, airspeed, distance, and direction. We basically make a bunch of calculations like the nerds that we are to figure out our headings, times, and altitudes and everything. It's really cool. It's actually, honestly, I think it's probably one of the coolest ways of navigating. My instructor would often basically tell me all right, give me your calculations, and then put me under the hood and be like, all right, let's see if you're right. It was really cool. Then there's radio navigation. We use VORs, very high frequency omnidirectional range radios, to navigate. One of my students laughs every time I talk about these. He thinks they're ancient technology. And of course, we've also got GPS navigation. Ideally, you want to use all of these at the same time. You want to be, checking your map, looking outside, checking your VORs, making sure you're tracking the right radials, double checking with the GPS, and also you've got your flight plan with your your navigational computations on your knee board, and you're cross-checking all of them. That is how you avoid getting lost, right? So you want to verify with your different types of navigation. Now, as safe pilots, we are required to get a good weather brief before we go fly. It's part of our requirements. FAR Part 91.103 requires a weather brief, right? This basically helps us decide whether or not we should go. You should set your own personal minimums on top of the FAA's legal minimums to make sure that you are going to make safe decisions, right? Remember that weather is a major factor, but also think about the airplane, the route, and the pilot, etc. It's a continual decision. Basically, a lot of people think like, okay, cool, it's a sunny day, I'm going to go fly. That's not really the right answer, because weather might roll in or visibility might deteriorate due to smoke, right? So check the weather before you go and then get updated briefs if you're doing long flights. Now let's talk about how you plan a flight. There are a couple different ways we do it, but typically there's a flight log. We organize our points, our headings, our climbs, descents, and stuff like that, using a piece of paper, essentially. Fuel time, altitudes, headings, frequencies at each waypoint. This is a big one, actually. Making sure that you have the right radio frequencies for each airport. Because if you try to contact an airport and you've got the wrong frequency, you're going to have a bad time. You start out with your chart. You draw a line between your points. So from your departure point to your first checkpoint, so on and so forth. And you basically want to make sure that you're, clearing obstacles, clearing airspace that you shouldn't be going through. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. Checkpoints. Navlog. Yeah. We're going to go into how to actually do this later on, but in general, we want to calculate and record our true airspeed. So we want to make our calculations, figure out how long it's going to take to get us somewhere. And then as we fly, we're going to see how close we are to that calculation and update it on our navlog. All right. We want to note down our checkpoints on the navlog, record the distance between each waypoint, calculate the true course for each leg, and adjust for wind. This is a cool one. It's so cool how we correct for wind. Again, my students think I'm a giant nerd, but I think it's so cool how we actually correct for wind using old school E6Bs and stuff. Calculate the estimated time and fuel burn for each leg. And again, we're going to cover how to do that. It's so cool. All right. What are you doing? All right. Once you have decided what you're going to go do, you're not required to, but you can file a flight plan with the FAA. This is a good idea because if you can't make it to your destination, if something goes wrong, this is how they know to send a search and rescue team out to help you. And we're going to talk about how they look like in a bit. So once you file your flight plan, you open it up with the flight service station. And then when you get to your destination, remember that they will not close your flight plan unless you tell them to. So you have to let them know, hey, I've made it to my destination. Please close 38 Echo's flight plan. Right? Cool. If you can't make it to your destination, you might need to divert to an alternate airport. So you should be aware of potential diversion airports along your route. This is another requirement before you go fly. You can use shortcuts, rule of thumb computations when necessary. You don't need to get crazy specific or crazy accurate with your calculations if you decide you need to, go to an alternate. You can use your thumb or whatever additional tools you have in the aircraft to make safe decisions. Right? Oh, something else you can use is the GPS. A lot of GPS units nowadays have a nearest function. You just, type in nearest or tap nearest, and it'll give you a list of the nearest airports in the area. And just go to, the best one. So this is what you should do if you find yourself needing to go to an alternate. First of all, verify your position on the chart. You should be doing this already as safe pilots. And then point your nose at your alternate, right? Divert immediately to the alternate using shortcuts, rules of thumb, or GPS, and then note the time that you left your initial flight plan. Choose an altitude based on the terrain, radio reception for VORs, and we'll talk about those later, clouds, wind, etc. Remember, in VFR, we're not allowed to fly into clouds, so stay out of those clouds. You can use the winds aloft data. This tells us information about what the winds are doing, their direction and speed, and temperature at altitude, because that is also going to come into play. And then you can make more precise calculations once you're established in general of where you're trying to go. Remember, aviate, navigate, communicate in that order. Fly the plane first. It's not going to help you if you're doing a perfect calculation while your airplane's flying into a mountain. So aviate, navigate, communicate. It will also, determine the arrival time and fuel required. Cool. Now, what happens if you get lost? If you decide to divert and you're like, shoot, I thought I was over here, but now I'm actually over here, and now I have no idea where I am. Not a good look, right? The best thing to do is avoid getting lost. Plan ahead, know your route, fly it on the simulator a couple of times before you go, like a giant nerd like me, and then use multiple sources to monitor your location. Like I said, pilotage. Keep your eyes outside the airplane and verify where you are. Use dead reckoning. Calculate your route. VORs, GPS, and then also talk to ATC. This is something that we can do as VFR pilots. We can actually request VFR flight following. This is where they keep an eye on us while we're flying. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to, give us priority, but they can keep an eye on us while we're flying. If you're lost, don't panic. Panicking never helped anybody. Remember the 5 C's. Climb. The higher you are, the more you can see. Communicate. Talk to ATC. Say, hey, I don't know where I am, right? Or go to the emergency frequency. Confess. Explain, hey, 38 Echo's lost. Comply. If ATC is like, all right, we've got you on our scopes, make a left turn 270. Follow their instructions. They will help you. And then conserve. You don't need to be going full afterburner in your Cessna 172 when you're lost. You can reduce your power and save some fuel. Some things to keep in mind, because you remember we talked about earlier the magnetic compass versus the gyroscopic heading indicator? Well, one of the principles of a gyroscope are precession. It's likely that your gyroscope has precessed and it actually gotten off heading. So when you are straight and level, check your heading indicator with your compass to make sure that they agree. And if they don't, fix it. And then attempt to plot your position with a nav aid like a VOR or a GPS. And then remember that visual references can help you. Something like water towers or big prominent things like mountains. Mount Rainier might be a good one to help you figure out where you are. So that's lost procedures. Questions? We're getting close. Sweet. Now, I want you guys to follow along for this part. Go ahead and go to SkyVector. We're going to make a quick flight plan from Payne to Hoquiam. And we're actually going to pick 2 alternates along the way. We're going to do this quick since we're short on time. I'm using Bremerton and Olympia as my alternates. So instead of going direct, I'm going to use 2 alternates as my checkpoints. So remember that part 91.103? This is the acronym that I like to use to remember all those things that they require. Northwest Craft. That stands for NOTAMs, Notices to Air Missions, Weather, Known Delays, Runways, Alternates, Fuel, and Takeoff and Landing Distance Calculations. This is something I do literally every time I go fly. NOTAMs and weather. If you go to 1-800-weatherbrief.com and you can either go to weather charts or plan and brief. If you're not planning a flight, if you just want to get comfortable understanding weather, check out the weather charts, right? This is a really cool service they provide. They give you broad pictures of what the weather's doing in the country. Go study these. They're really cool. Well, if you're a nerd like me, I think they're really cool. And you can see what the weather does in the country. If you're actually planning a flight, go to Plan and Brief. There. And then this is what it comes up with. This is a flight plan form. You put in your aircraft ID, that's your tail number, VFR, G for general. By the way, if you're ever unclear about what you're supposed to put in for these, they have little magnifying glasses to help you understand what you're supposed to do. Aircraft type, turbulence, equipment, departure, route of flight and destination, time and date, cruising speed, via your flight level, like what altitude you'll be flying at, and then your alternates here, and then any contact information, aircraft markings. Basically run through this whole thing. Just go from right to left, top to bottom, and it'll basically fill in everything that you need. When you're ready, when you're done with that, go to Route Brief, and this will come up with a PDF or a web-based report about what the weather is doing. And take a look at how long that is. That's 206 pages of weather. Isn't that awesome? I think it's cool. I wanted to show you the full report, but we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to bypass it. If you want to go check it out, I might actually post it in the notes for this video, so you can download it and kind of look through it, or you can just go, make your own and study it. We will get into these later on. Super important. So in plain English, it gives you a weather report for your route, plus or minus some time, and then it helps you make good decisions about whether or not you should go fly. So that's NOTAMs and weather. Next in our Northwest craft is known ATC delays. You can Google the air traffic control system, and then it'll basically tell you any delays that are happening in the area. For this, let's see, what is it? Users can expect intermittent holding into LGA Airport. I have no idea where that is, but if it affects you, great. If it doesn't, whatever. So that's known delays. Going to keep moving on since we're short on time. Next is runways. If you go to SkyVector right now and right-click on Pane Field, you can open up the airport diagram. And this is basically a map of the airport. From here, there's a lot of information. We're going to skip over it since we're short. Check out right here. This long runway is 9,010 feet by 150 feet. Now, I don't know if we can take off in our Cessna with that much runway. We'll have to do some calculations later to figure it out. Also, we've got the short runway, 3,004 feet by 75. So these two runways are our options. And again, later on, we'll do some calculations to make sure we can use those runways to take off and land. You can do the same thing at Hoquiam or any other airport on SkyVector. Now, moving on from our Northwest craft, we've got our alternates. You are required to know about the alternates in your flight plan. So we've got Payne to Hoquiam, and then Bremerton and Olympia. We do the same thing. Right-click on here, pull up anything we can find about the airport, and get to know the frequencies, runway distances, that kind of stuff. Again, we're going pretty quick since we're short on time. Next time we'll get more in depth. So get to know your alternates, and then going on to fuel. You are required to know how much fuel you've got and have a fuel reserve as well. So you should calculate the time to your target and then add a fuel reserve depending on the situation. So the legal minimum, legally, you need 30 minutes of additional fuel for VFR day flying, and you need 45 minutes at night. So you have to get from Payne to Bremerton or to Hoquiam and then have enough to loiter for an additional 30 minutes. Now, I don't like that. I like to have an additional hour of fuel because I like to be safe. Let's just put it that way. IFR are different. Our instrument flight rules are different. So we'll cover those when we move on to instrument flying later. Here's a super basic example. If you have a 106 nautical mile flight from, let's say, Payne to Hoquiam, we're cruising at 120 knots. So it's 106 and 120 knots, and we're burning 9 gallons an hour. Determine how much fuel we need plus reserves. So real quick, really basic. We have 106 nautical miles, right? And we're cruising at 120 nautical miles per hour. The nautical miles are going to cross out. And what's that? 106 divided by 120. I mean, you guys are intelligent. I'm sure you can figure it out. That's 0.88 hours. That's what's left. We're going to add 0.5 hours to that. Oh, shoot. Minus 5 plus 0.5. It comes out to 1.38 hours, right? And we're going to burn 9 gallons per hour. The hours cross out times 9. Comes out to 12.45 gallons. That's how much fuel we need for this flight, right? And remember, this doesn't take into account taxi, climb out, cruise, and descent. We will talk about that later. If you go to your pilot operating handbook here in the performance section, that's where we get information about takeoff and landing distance calculations. Basically, for a given situation, weight, pressure, altitude, and temperature, it'll tell us how much runway we need for a particular flight. Performance, if we're climbing out, if we need to go up to 6,000 feet, it'll take us 10 minutes. We'll burn 1.9 gallons. It'll take 12 miles. And then at altitude, 6,000 feet, we'll be flying at 120 knots and burn 8.4 gallons per hour. So that's how you use this. Again, I know I'm going super fast just because we're shorter on time. But that's how you use your performance charts in general. And then there's the landing distance. Same thing for the condition, pressure, altitude, and temperature. It'll tell you how much distance you need to land the aircraft. Bam. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Questions, Q&A right now. If no questions, then we can just, I'll tell you what your homework is. Thanks again for sticking with me, guys. I really appreciate it. This is awesome. Here's your homework. Go check out modules 201 through 203. Keep quizzing yourself, and don't hesitate to ask me questions. I love answering your questions. And if you have any feedback from me, if you're like, hey, I can't stand the sound of your voice, I'll go hire somebody else to talk to you or something like that. Just give me some feedback. Let me know what you think. If you think it's great, that's great. But if you do have anything for me to improve, I would really appreciate it. If not, sweet. Well, thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys are the best. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. If you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to.